OTBsports.com this morning leads with Kieran Cunningham and his quotes from last night's show. Daniel Kinahan wants to be the king of boxing. Fury Joshua is going ahead. The OTB Brief is now live. That is our podcast that is available before even we're live on OTB AM every single weekday morning. So it's a very early hit of headlines, and as you can imagine, the golf and that Daniel Kinahan story dominating proceedings. There is the original news story that we had up yesterday. Fury and Joshua agreed 2-fight deal according to promoter Eddie Hearn. And then, as already mentioned earlier on here on OTB AM, NASCAR bans display of Confederate flag at its race meetings. So that is OTBsports.com for you this morning.
No mention of the fight on the Irish Independent this morning. GAA must think outside the box, says Nicky Brennan in his this Frank Roach piece here. Provinces may need to consider everything, says Nicky Brennan, the former president of the GAA. Midweek games, fewer venues, grounds with floodlights seems going to become hot property. Not having the potential of some Leinster games, and Thurday is specifically mentioned, which has been done before, obviously. He raised the prospect of counties as well, not having run-off club games before county teams return to training, and the headaches, obviously, that will come with that. That is the return of the GAA. More on that in some of the other papers. And Rory McIlroy, Tiger was my hero. His skin colour didn't matter, writes Gareth Hanna.
Tonight is like the Masters, Adrian. It certainly feels like this is the weekend where you're going to sit down and spend a lot of time in the company of golf, because we didn't know what we had until it was gone, quite frankly.
The Charles Schwab Challenge, Eoin, has never been so eagerly anticipated a tournament. Bizarrely held at a club called Colonial. It's only when we start to have all these conversations that you start to look around you at all the things that exist that possibly shouldn't. I actually had a bit of a dig around to see the context of the naming of the golf club and couldn't really find very much other than it's over 100 years old, etc., which places an interesting point in history. But yeah, the Charles Schwab Challenge, on. You'll be watching?
I was going to say that you could swap the Charles Schwab Challenge trophy for a green jacket, because given the importance I'm placing on it. But you can't do that for two reasons. One, the trophy itself is absolutely incredible. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's got this massive winged eagle on the top of it. And second of all, I think there is an actual jacket involved in the Charles Schwab Challenge. Again, when you hear that the course name is Colonial, your eyebrows raise a small bit as well. And to be honest, go on.
I hear it's the fifth major, Owen. I think it's what I understand. It's
yes, indeed, it is. It's vying for that position, the official title of fifth major. So that's coming up later on, and that is the main story in the Irish Examiner today. Golf back in business as Rory seeks tolerance. So some of the tee times today, you've got Justin Thomas, Ricky Fowler, Jordan Spieth teeing off at 6:55 Irish time. But like the one, Nathan's been banging him out. I'm not sure if you've been watching OTB AM all week, Adrian, but you could sense Nathan's excitement through his Skype line at this tee time. 6 minutes past 7 this evening, Rory McIlroy, Brooks Koepka and John Rahm all playing together. The salivation that will be going on in the Nathan in the Murphy household this evening will be incredible. And then there's some earlier tee times as well. From 2:34 p.m. you've got Patrick Reed, Mark Leishman and Graham McDowell. And plenty to get your teeth stuck into, and it just all looks very, very appealing given it's been so long. A couple of other things here as well. Joe Schmidt says biennial tournament better indicator of world's best than World Cup. That's what he's been saying in his latest interview. Could we see a county final decided on penalties? Asks Larry Ryan. And an interesting piece here as well by Shane McGrath, who's always worth reading. Player power will come to the fore, but trust is now the key. So this is something that we spoke to Shane Kingston a little bit about on yesterday's show, about can you get yourself ready for inter-county football or hurling while being a full-time club player? He says no, and he also says that you can't really have interference from county teams because of the restrictions that are going to be put in place. But what McGrath's saying, to quote his piece, he says, I foresee the county player training for one night in a collective session, returning to their clubs for the rest of the week to prepare for club championship. That is while their clubs are involved. When their club is knocked out, they would of course become a full-time county player again. He says inter-county players have never been as educated in hydration, diet, recovery, to obtain high performance, and most importantly, to avoid injury. His one caveat here is who will actually make the call on dual players? Who will decide if a county player can play both codes with their club, perhaps football on a Saturday and hurling on a Sunday? And then his final point here is that I've heard it said we are throwing the clubs under the bus by letting them go first. I disagree. The clubs are driving the bus for now, and it may need a service along the way, and there will be bumps on the journey, but every passenger on the bus is delighted it's moving at all. So let's see where the journey takes us. He's talking a lot of sense there, and like I know I would echo the view that it is fantastic that the clubs are getting their opportunity in the spotlight, and it's no harm for the county train to be slowed down a little bit in terms of what it's become a runaway now in the last couple of years. But at the same time, there is a middle ground to be got here, especially in the latter stages of the club championship, that if the county team honestly feel that whatever it's going to be 1, 2, 3 weeks of preparation isn't enough, that perhaps one session with their club players could be something that could be looked into down the line.
I wasn't sure that transport analogy could be better done, but I think you've done it there. Yeah, I'm not sure why you couldn't. Actually, like what I would say is, isn't this a fantastic opportunity when you consider the things that we're now considering in terms of our approach to the preparation of GAA teams, training, matches, dual players, inter-county club, playing games, playing provincial Leinster games outside of Leinster, playing midweek games. Like, look at all these things that we're suddenly having conversations about, like in the context of trying to get them run off, but like the opportunity to actually maybe lean on some of those things as a structure beyond COVID. It's fantastic, and it is only something like this that gives us the opportunity to have these conversations. I don't know why you couldn't, for example, have Shane Kingston knows infinitely more about what it takes to be an inter-county and club player than I do, but I don't know why you couldn't have one night with your county and then return back to your club. Like, you're missing out on that much that can't be caught up on in terms of tactics and preparation, and maybe does that say more about where the club game is at rather than one's capacity to be able to carry that off? I don't know.
Like, I think that there is a roadmap for the future here, that there is a possibility of this becoming the new norm for GAA, that you do focus on club activity for a large swathe of the year where there's actual good weather, and still allowing the fact that the county can have you for one night a week if there is the sign of a championship, whatever, 2 months down the line. So I guess the comparison is with football and having your club as your bread and butter and then going on international duty. We would still care about the international team just as much as the club teams, even if the windows are smaller. But it's a possibility, and like, again, you and I not being involved with a club at the moment can't really speak, but it definitely seems from the outside looking in, and Shane McGrath is echoing this, that you can have the situation where you can go with your county for one night a week. Like, it's not in their interest to run the legs off you in training either. It's not in the county's interest for them to injure you in training so that you're not going to be available for your club. Like, as you say, if it's tactics preparation, even if it's a bit of strength and conditioning early on, to have a player ready, and if that's done early in the week, whatever, 5-6 days before a championship game at your club, it could be workable. I accept that none of these solutions are ideal, but I think that we're tapping into something here where there could be a bit more of a happy marriage between club and county, which is just something that has been non-existent over the last few years.
Yeah, and I've always been of the view, and I understand it's slightly controversial, that the 1 or 2% of players who are involved in inter-county holding up the entire club season is beyond ludicrous anyway. I don't know that we'll ever move past that, given that people who are so deeply involved with these things would never want to hear of it, as in they wouldn't want their inter-county players not being available, and I kind of get that, but at the same time it's holding up the entire thing. But it is a class opportunity to trial some of these things now in the context of everything that's going on and see what we're left with at the other side. That's the Examiner on, is it?
That was the Irish Examiner, yes.
Yeah, the Irish Times this morning, golf is back, and Rory looking very pleased about it on the back page of the Irish Times for you this morning. Philip Reid with the story here. And, the Charles Schwab Challenge, as we mentioned a bit earlier on, 3 months after the players was abandoned, we have full-on competitive golf. McIlroy, as Eoin mentioned a bit earlier, out alongside Rahm and Koepka. And one of Spieth's favourite courses as well, so we'll see how that plays out a bit later on. And in this piece, Rory speaking about having more racial diversity in golf, as we mentioned, as they tee it up at Colonial. That's the golf. Dave Hannigan has the story of the passing of a Chicago boxing great, Tom O'Shea. Not a name that I was familiar with, but one of 4 fighting brothers. And Tom lost on his Golden Gloves title in '58 to his brother Brian. There was 4 of them in total, and he went on, Tom, to become a professor and a highly rated amateur coach as well, and passed away this week. And a big story across the bottom there by Johnny Watterson. Fury thanks Daniel Kinahan as deal struck for Joshua fights. This is a story we touched on a bit earlier on, and the direct quote here from the Johnny Watterson piece: "The deal firmly places Irishman Daniel Kinahan, who Fury publicly thanked on Instagram, among the sport's most influential figures. Kinahan's involvement in the top levels of organised crime has been accepted as fact by an Irish court, despite the 42-year-old's lack of previous convictions." So that's the story there from Johnny Watterson. It seems like only a matter of time before Daniel Kinahan, and I genuinely mean this, rocks up at a press conference to talk about the upcoming bouts. But that's the story covered in the Irish Times this morning.
Yeah, an inevitability, I think. An interesting question raised by Kieran Cunningham last night was how big the international media is going to go on this. He suspects that the UK media is going to go big on this. He's right. It is the lead story on the back of the London Times this morning. Fury says deal in place for Joshua fight. This is Rick Broadbent's piece, and it includes plenty of detail for British readers this morning on Daniel Kinahan. Anthony Joshua facing fresh controversy after, Tyson Fury, of course, facing fresh controversy after publicly thanking a man who has been accused of heading an international crime gang. In an Instagram post, the WBC heavyweight champion said he had just got off the phone to Daniel Kinahan, the founder of his management group, MTK Global. Kinahan's role as dealmaker, just to quote Broadbent, will raise eyebrows. Based in Dubai, he has no criminal record, but in 2018, the Criminal Assets Bureau told Dublin's High Court he controlled and managed operations for the Kinahan organised crime group, which smuggled drugs and guns into Ireland and was worth €1 billion. His role last night was made clear by Frank Warren, who confirmed talks have been taking place between Kinahan and Eddie Hearn. So the ball is rolling firmly in the UK, and if you say it's only a matter of time before he shows up at press conferences, it's only a matter of time before people are like, who's he?
Yeah. The Irish Daily Mail for you this morning. Michael Clifford has an exclusive here that features in some of the other papers as well on the return of inter-county football. Round 6, he says, of the Football League has been provisionally fixed to restart the inter-county season with a specific date of October the 17th. So it only leaves a small number of final round games to be run off after that. No date has yet been set for anything beyond those round 6 games, but the proposition of an actual date now, it is some way away. But October the 17th to close out the inter-county game, and I presume use those as a sample for what might follow with some sort of a condensed championship perhaps before the year is out, but no mention of that just yet. It is included in that Michael Clifford story, a line from the CPA's Michael Brody, who wants inter-county teams who return to training against the GAA roadmap to be thrown out of the championship on. In a move that'll never be seen. It's not a very GAA thing to do. There'll be a rap across the knuckles. There'll be a listen, must do better next time sort of thing. But I can't see like Michael Brody now has his gander up, obviously, given that the clubs are in such a position of strength, and is trying to force that home there. Also a lovely shot of full parts in Belgrade Stadium. No restrictions on the numbers of fans that are allowed in. It seems like Serbia must be in a pretty good position. Not overly familiar with their coronavirus rates, but the fact that they're jam-packing the parts in Belgrade Stadium suggests that everything's A-OK over there.
That's it. I'm officially off the Dynamo Minsk bandwagon. I am now a Partizan Belgrade fan.
And Rory raring to go for a restart in Texas.
The Irish Daily Star this morning, as you can imagine, with a load of Daniel Kinahan coverage. The front page, crime lord of the ring. Feud victim's dad, Kinahan, should be shunned. Fury as Tyson praises mob boss. Shameful day for pro boxing. And comment on the inside as well. We will not cover these fights. As you heard there on the front page, feud victim's dad, Kinahan, should be shunned. They've got a series of pieces inside, just one of them by Paul Healy, an exclusive. The father of feud victim Michael Barr has said mob boss Daniel Kinahan should be shunned in world boxing following unprecedented praise from Tyson Fury. He will bring boxing to its knees, says his father. The conference in Bahrain should be boycotted by the press and starve him of the publicity he craves. Michael Barr, the manager of the Sunset House in Dublin's North Inner City, was shot 7 times by a masked gunman at the pub on April 24th, 2016. He was murdered after the cartel wrongly believed he was involved in the Regency Hotel murder of their associate, David Byrne. You've also got things like fresh anti-Kinahan graffiti being sprayed onto the gates of the embassy of the UAE in Dublin. The graffiti states that Dubai staff are in danger and also states, get cancer, Daniel Kinahan out of Dubai. So plenty of coverage in the Irish Daily Star news section this morning. The back of the Irish Daily Star then in the sports section leads with Mersey treat. Goodison Derby gets go-ahead. Rory is in call for tolerance meanwhile. He says growing up amid the troubles in the north gave him a good understanding of the global unrest following the slaying of George Floyd. Kinahan links sparks Fury meanwhile as their coverage continues here. Boxing fans were stunned yesterday as Tyson Fury thanked Dublin gang boss Daniel Kinahan for getting his showdown with Joshua over the line, and negative League of Ireland hope for positive outcome as players yet to test positive for COVID-19 in our own league.
The Irish Sun this morning also touching on the front page here. First of all, it's a Dan deal, it says across the front page. Fury shout out from mob bosses, Joshua megabouts are agreed. And then on the back page, Wally Downs Jr. writes on the same topic. There you can see all of that. And Eoin Cowser has League of Ireland exclusive. Clubs will today be presented with a financial proposal to get back to action. An offer to help offset losses, it seems, from obviously games being held behind closed doors and the lack of revenue that comes in there, and also the possibility or the promise of some new money as well. So, but no details exactly as yet as to where that new money is coming from. But it does seem as if the 19 clubs are going to have some sort of a vote, and certainly more details shared on it a little bit later today. And Gordon Manning also has that exclusive that appears in the Daily Mail, that round 6 of the league is being actively positioned as the return for intercounty football in October.
The Mirror is next up for me. Prem's £1 billion virus hit. Financial experts reveal the cost of pandemic to football. Fury says, I'll finish AJ and Hearn. Tyson Fury, as you can imagine from the headline there, saying he'll finish off Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing by beating Anthony Joshua. Mersey fans vow to steer clear of game, writes David Maddock. Liverpool and Everton fans insist the authorities won't regret allowing the Merseyside derby to be staged at Goodison Park. Alan's late call-up for Italia 90, and FAI wait to hear on cash. Clubs will get 5 days to mull over the FAI's return to play financial package. So that is the latest from the Irish Daily Mirror this morning.
The Telegraph, this will be the biggest British fight in history, writes Gareth A. Davies here. Fight maker Daniel Kinahan referred to in this article as a sometimes controversial character, it says here. It's worth mentioning that Daniel Kinahan is not mentioned at all in the Guardian piece, and also referred to as a controversial figure in the Times London, the London Times today. So that's just give you a bit of a sense as to how the UK media are reporting in this story. And it is obviously one of the biggest shames of this entire thing is that we should all be licking our lips this morning at the prospect of what will be a fascinating bout. How much we can actually engage in that in a sporting sense now obviously remains to be seen, given the connections involved and given the fact that the fight is taking place in a regime like Saudi Arabia that is obviously hosting the fight there for very deliberate reasons. So there is obviously a sense of disappointment and all that, but I'm sure there'll be much more on both of those sides of the story over the coming weeks and months. An incredible story across the top of the Telegraph. Just flash it up there again. Alarming lack of black leaders in sport, writes Ben Rumsby here, and the statistic that just 3% of positions, 3% on national governing boards in the UK are occupied by black people. It's absolutely incredible, and I would say that you would have to assume that we're the very same here, so it's certainly not a case of pointing fingers over the water. But certainly holding this up, it says of the 11 board members on the FA board, none are black. Same for the RFU, same for the England and Wales Cricket Board, tennis, swimming, and incredibly UK Sport, the board of UK Sport, with no black members whatsoever. And as I said, I'm sure that if we were to dig into these statistics on this side of the water, they'd be much the same.
The Guardian this morning leads with devastating drop. Premier League clubs face £500 million loss, warns Deloitte. Premiership players moving towards strike over wage cuts. Meanwhile, this is England's leading club rugby players. They're considering strike action in an increasingly bitter row over the imposition of permanent wage cuts. They're looking to bring the salary cap down in the Premiership. Many clubs already imposing temporary salary reductions of 25%, prompted by the lockdown. And Kevin Mitchell on the potential blockbuster, The Best of British, Joshua versus Fury, moves a step closer as parties agree 2-fight deal. And as Adrian has mentioned, there's no mention of Mr. Kinahan in that particular article.
The Racing Post prize money row erupts as Tracks accused of anti-competitive practice here, writes Bill Barber. Divisions essentially over prize money as raised by the Horsemen's Group. That's the Racing Post. Just before we get on to the app then, just the front page of the Herald this morning is "Don't let evil Kinahan win." Crime boss Daniel Kinahan must not win his fight for credibility, a TD has warned.
So this is Neil Richmond, who's been on the record slamming the move, saying evil Daniel Kinahan cannot be allowed run for cover. And in the back of the Herald, there's all options on the table. Brennan urges the GAA to look beyond usual venue boundaries. I think, Adrian, you've already mentioned that story with Nicky Brennan. The OTB Sports app, meanwhile, it's your one-stop shop for all things off the ball, from breaking news to our live shows, videos, and our 40 hours plus of podcasts every single week. It'll also be the exclusive home of live Premier League commentary when play resumes next week. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with Stephen Doyle in a little while. So it's brand new, it's out now, it's on the Play Store, it's on the App Store, depending on your phone. It is slick, and it is available right now.